Rain fell in cold sheets against the ancient stones of Cael Harrow, its towers looming like silent sentinels over the ravaged fields below. The moon hid behind a shroud of storm, leaving only the flicker of torchlight to carve trembling patterns along the walls. In the hush between thunderclaps, Lady Seralyne moved like a shadow through the midnight halls, her heart beating a frantic rhythm beneath rib and velvet. She had been raised within these walls, her every step measured, her every breath weighed against duty. Tonight, that careful balance teetered on a blade's edge. She paused at a half-rotted door, the iron handle slick with damp. Beyond it, the labyrinthine undercroft stretched into darkness. Once a place of sanctuary for her ancestors, now a prison for secrets. Her hand hesitated, trembling not with fear, but with the burden of what she carried, a life poised between mercy and ruin. On the straw-strewn floor, the stranger lay as she had left him, armor caked with mud and blood, the sigil of House Varron glinting faintly beneath the grime. His breath was shallow, each exhale a struggle against pain, yet his gaze clung to her with a quiet, unyielding plea. Seralyne knelt, her gown soaking through with the chill of the stones. She pressed a damp cloth to the wound along his side, watching his jaw tighten. He did not cry out. Warriors of Varron were bred for silence, or so the tales claimed. But in his eyes she read the ache of a man who had lost more than blood. In another life, she might have left him to fate, letting the storm claim what the sword had spared. Yet something in the set of his mouth, the echo of sorrow, the stubborn refusal to yield, called to a part of her heart she had long thought buried. The memory of her brother's last night surfaced, unbidden, the hurried words, the promise pressed into her palm, the desperate hope that mercy might outlast the war. She had failed him then, bound by a code that demanded loyalty above love. Now, with the enemy's life in her hands, she wondered if redemption might wear the face of a stranger. Would you have found the strength to choose mercy, knowing it could cost you everything? Or would you, like so many before, let fear snuff out compassion in the dark? A distant bell tolled, muffled by rain and stone. Seralyne listened, counting the beats, 3 then 4, each one a reminder of how little time remained before dawn. Above, the fortress braced for another day of siege. Soldiers sharpening blades in the armory, courtiers whispering in the galleries, her kin huddled behind walls, built not just of stone, but of suspicion and old betrayals. Her own betrothal to Lord Marren loomed on the horizon, a union forged not by affection, but by the brittle hope that 2 warring houses might find peace. She had accepted it as her duty, the price of her family's survival. But what now was that promise worth when weighed against the life of the man at her feet? She studied his face, sharp-boned, with shadows beneath his eyes, and a mouth set in lines of pain and pride. Not a face she could trust, the world would say, yet she found herself searching for signs of truth in the way his gaze held hers. He spoke, voice roughened by fever and exhaustion, urging her to leave him, to save herself from the consequences of pity. The words twisted in the silence, each one a warning and a plea. Seralyne shook her head, refusing. She could not abandon him, not yet, not when the ghost of her brother's memory pressed so heavily against her soul. The storm outside gathered strength, thunder rolling across the ramparts. Within the undercroft time stretched and folded, the night thick with secrets. Seralyne worked in silence, binding the night's wound with strips torn from her own cloak. Her hands moved with practiced care, learned not from gentle lessons, but from the grim necessities of war. She had seen too much blood, too many futures ended by a blade. Each touch was both a confession and a defiance, a silent promise that for this night at least, she would not be the instrument of another's end. Above them, footsteps echoed, guards making their rounds, searching for signs of weakness in the fortress's defenses. Seralyne flattened herself against the damp wall, heart hammering, and waited as the shadows slid past. The danger was constant, every moment a test of her resolve. If discovered, her fate would be sealed, branded traitor, stripped of title and kin, perhaps worse. Yet the thought of turning away did not come. Instead, she found herself drawn deeper into the gloom, as if the darkness itself whispered that some debts could only be paid in silence. The knight drifted in and out of consciousness, fever burning through his veins. He murmured names, some familiar, others lost to the years of conflict. Seralyne caught fragments, the name of a sister, a promise made to a dying friend, a plea for forgiveness she could not grant. Each word cut through the quiet, another thread binding her to the man whose life she now sheltered. In the flickering torchlight, his vulnerability was a stark contrast to the stories told of Varen's iron-hearted warriors. She wondered what truths lay hidden beneath the armor, what dreams, what regrets. A memory surfaced, her father, stern and unyielding, once telling her that alliances are built on necessity, not affection. "Trust no one outside these walls," he had warned, "for every kindness is a coin to be spent or stolen." Yet even as she recalled his words, Seralyne felt them slipping away, replaced by something softer, more dangerous. She wondered if, in some distant future, this night would be remembered not as a moment of weakness, but as the first trembling step toward something greater. The hours crept by. Outside, the wind howled, battering the fortress with rain and fury. Within, Seralyne kept vigil, watching the rise and fall of the knight's chest, the fitful tremor of his hands. She did not speak of the war, nor of the fate that awaited her above. Those things belonged to another life, one she was no longer certain she wished to claim. Instead, she offered what little comfort she could, a cup of water, a whispered reassurance, the warmth of her presence in the darkness. As dawn approached, the world beyond the undercroft stirred. The clang of armor in the courtyards, the hurried orders of captains, the distant wail of a mother mourning her lost sons. It was a world built on sacrifice and suspicion, where every act of kindness risked being mistaken for betrayal. Seralyne understood this truth better than most. She had lived it, borne its scars. Yet here, beneath the weight of stone and storm, she allowed herself to hope that mercy might yet carve out a place in the ruins of all that had been lost. Before slipping away to her own chambers, she pressed her hand to the knight's brow, feeling the fever recede beneath her touch. His eyes fluttered open, confusion and gratitude mingling in their depths. He tried to speak, but she silenced him with a look, warning him of the danger that still prowled the halls above. There would be time for words, perhaps, when the storm passed and the world made sense again. For now, all that mattered was survival and the fragile thread of trust that bound them, for better or worse. Outside, the sky paled, streaked with the first hint of morning. Seralyne moved through the corridors like a wraith, her mind racing with the weight of what she had done. She passed servants and soldiers, each one a potential witness, each glance a blade pressed to her throat. Her heart ached with the knowledge that she was no longer who she had been, that something fundamental had shifted within her, as irrevocable as the tide. In the privacy of her chambers, she washed the blood from her hands, watching the water swirl red and dark in the basin. She thought of her betrothal, of the peace it was meant to ensure, and wondered if any treaty could heal the wounds carved by so many years of hatred. She thought, too, of the knight below, and the way his pain had mirrored her own. There was a connection there, fragile and dangerous, that defied reason and obligation alike. If you have ever felt the pull of two worlds, duty and desire, loyalty and longing, then you know the agony that twisted through Seralyne's heart that morning. She had broken no oath, spoken no treason, yet she knew herself changed, marked by the secret she now carried. In the days to come, every glance, every word would be a test. Would she be strong enough to protect the life she had saved, or would the weight of her choice crush her beneath the expectations of blood and honor? Only the shadows knew the answer, and they kept their secrets well. The fortress awoke to another day of siege, its walls bristling with suspicion and silent alarms. In the great hall, courtiers whispered of traitors and spies, spinning tales to fill the emptiness left by so many lost sons. Seralyne moved among them, her face a mask of composure, her heart battered by the memory of the night before. She listened for news from the front, for rumors of Varen's movements, for any sign that her secret had been discovered. Yet the hours passed in tension and silence, each moment drawing the noose tighter around her neck. That night, as the rain returned and thunder shook the stones, Seralyne found herself drawn once more to the undercroft. The knight slept fitfully, fever breaking at last, his face softened by exhaustion and relief. She watched him in the half-light, wondering what future might yet be forged from the ruins of their broken worlds. The answer, she knew, lay hidden in the shadows, waiting for the moment when trust, so hard won and so easily lost, would be tested by fire. If you have ever stood at the edge of a choice that could shatter everything, you know what it is to live in the pause before disaster. Will Seralyne's act of mercy spark a new hope, or will it ignite the very war she hoped to end? Stay close to the fire, for the tale has only just begun, and the darkest hour is yet to come. Dawn crept into Cael Harrow with a pale reluctance, its weak light pooling in the corners of the keep and glinting off rain-slicked stones. Shadows clung to every corridor, as if the fortress itself recoiled from what the day might reveal. Seralyne moved through these silent halls with measured steps, her heart a tremor beneath her ribs. Each footfall echoed with the weight of secrets, heavy, fragile things, threatening to shatter with the slightest misstep. The world beyond the fortress walls was waking to the aftermath of storm. Villagers in the distant hamlet of Briar Hollow gathered in hushed knots, eyes fixed on the banners fluttering above Cael Harrow, seeking omens in their tattered edges. Rumors travelled swift as the wind, of enemy scouts glimpsed at the river's bend, of a shadowy figure slipping through the gates in the dead of night. None could know how close the truth pressed to their hearts, or how a single act of mercy might tip the fragile peace into chaos. Within the undercroft, the air was thick with the scent of damp stone and healing balms. Kelric's fever had broken, yet his body bore the wounds of both blade and memory. He woke to find Seralyne seated at his side, her hands wrapped around the hilt of a dagger, knuckles white with resolve. She did not startle as his eyes opened, nor did she soften. Instead, she spoke softly, her words measured as oaths. She warned him that his presence endangered them both, that trust was a currency they could not spend freely. Yet in the hush between her sentences, something unspoken lingered. A question, a plea, a sorrow shared by those who have lost too much. Kelric listened, his voice rough as gravel when he replied. He told her of the letter sewn into his cloak, folded close to his heart. It was a missive from Prince Raylan, a desperate attempt to broker peace, or at least delay slaughter. If the letter reached its intended hands, perhaps hundreds might be spared the blade, but the sigil upon the seal was enough to damn him in these halls. He entrusted the truth to her, not merely as a gambit for survival, but as a fractured offering of faith, a hope that one soul might recognize another beneath the armor of enemy colors. Seralyne's mind reeled with the burden of this knowledge. She thought of her brother, lost to the very war that now pressed at their gates. She remembered the promise made at his graveside, never to let vengeance blind her to mercy, never to become a vessel for the hatred that had consumed their house. Yet mercy, she realized, was a blade of its own, sharp and double-edged. To risk everything for a stranger was folly. To do nothing was a slow, silent death of another kind. Outside, the fortress was a hive of preparation. Lord Maren's arrival was imminent, his retinue already glimpsed on the horizon, a river of steel and banners snaking through the sodden fields. The union between Seralyne and Maren was to be the keystone of peace, the mortar binding two bloodied houses together. Every servant, every guard, every wary noble peered at Seralyne with the gaze of those who expect a sacrifice for the greater good. In such a world, love was a luxury for the dead or the damned. Still, the days bled one into the next. each hour tightening the snare of suspicion. In the dim hours after dusk, Seralyne returned to Kelric, bearing bread, water, and news from the world above. Their conversations were short, words rationed like precious coin, yet their silences grew rich with meaning. There were moments when her hand brushed his as she changed his bandages, sparks of warmth darting through the gloom. She caught herself remembering the color of his eyes, the line of his jaw, the defiant tilt of his mouth as he spoke of hope in a world built on ruin. One night, as thunder rolled over the distant hills, Kelric asked her if she believed peace could ever truly be forged from so much blood. Seralyne hesitated, her gaze drifting to the stone ceiling, as though searching for answers in the cracks and scars of the ancient keep. She confessed that once she had believed such things were possible, that her father's dreams of unity had kindled a fire in her soul. But the years had been cruel, and hope was a fragile thing, easily snuffed by betrayal. Yet even as she spoke, she felt a treacherous flicker reignite, a yearning for something more than duty and ashes. Meanwhile, suspicion festered in the upper halls. Lady Maevra, Seralyne's cousin, watched her movements with narrowed eyes. Whispers wormed their way through the staff, of late-night wanderings, of food gone missing, of a shadow in the crypts. Seralyne felt the weight of every glance, every pause in conversation when she passed. There were moments, alone in the corridors, when she wondered if her mercy had already cost her everything, and the axe simply waited for the right moment to fall. Lord Maren's arrival brought a chill to the air that no hearth could dispel. He was a man carved from ice and ambition, his smile a blade sheathed in velvet. The betrothal feast bloomed with forced laughter and toasts to peace, yet Seralyne's heart drummed a funeral march. Maren spoke of unity, of strong heirs and lasting alliances, his hand resting possessively upon hers. She endured the charade, her mind 1,000 miles away, in the Undercroft, with a wounded knight whose life now depended on her silence. Between her and Kelric, the tension grew like a storm straining against the horizon. Their worlds, once separated by banners and blood, now overlapped in stolen glances and trembling hands. Each risked more with every meeting, every whispered promise. The letter in Kelric's possession became their shared secret, a talisman of hope, a curse that bound them tighter with each passing day. One evening, as the fortress settled into uneasy sleep, Seralyne pressed the letter into Kelric's hands. She had made her decision. She would see it delivered, even if it cost her the last shreds of her honor. Their fingers lingered, a touch that said more than any vow spoken aloud. In that moment, the world outside faded, the war, the whispers, the looming threat of discovery. There was only the fragile warmth of another soul, and the knowledge that love, once found, could not be buried by fear. But danger crept ever closer. In the crypts beneath the keep, footsteps echoed. A guard, perhaps, or a traitor drawn by suspicion. Seralyne and Kelric froze, hearts hammering as the torchlight flickered beyond the archway, time stretched, brittle and breathless. Seralyne slipped the letter into her bodice, her pulse a wild drumbeat in the silence. The footsteps faded, but the lesson remained. Every moment was borrowed, every heartbeat a wager. If you have ever held a secret so dear that it threatened to consume you, you know the agony that now haunted Seralyne's every thought. Would you risk your name, your future, your very soul, for a love that might never see the light? The path ahead grew darker, each choice a step deeper into the abyss. The fortress braced for siege, not from an enemy at the gates, but from betrayal within. The day came when Seralyne's absence was noted, when Lady Maevra's suspicions hardened into accusation. Guards swept through the halls, searching for the source of the rot. In the Undercroft, Seralyne and Kelric prepared for flight, their plans hastily whispered, hope flickering like a candle in the storm. Yet fate, as ever, was a cruel warden. As they made for the North Passage, a figure blocked their path, Maevra, sword drawn, her eyes alight with triumph and fury. She called for the guards, her voice ringing through the stone like a death knell. Kelric moved to shield Seralyne, but the odds were hopeless. In the chaos that followed, he was seized, dragged in chains before the court. Seralyne stood powerless, her betrayal laid bare before those she once called kin. The hall trembled with the weight of judgment, every eye upon the lady who had dared to love an enemy. Lord Maren's face was a mask of cold outrage, his dreams of peace now ashes at his feet. Seralyne's pleas for mercy fell on deaf ears. The world she had known was gone, replaced by the yawning chasm of consequence. Yet in the crucible of loss, a strange courage bloomed. Seralyne met Kelric's gaze across the hall, a silent promise passing between them, one forged in darkness and bound by the memory of every touch, every stolen moment. The storm outside was nothing compared to the tempest within. She had chosen her path, and now she would walk it to the end, whatever price the fates demanded. If you have ever stood at the edge of the world, heart in ruins, you know what it is to face the reckoning of your own choices. The tale is not yet done. The darkest hour is upon us, and the fire of love burns brightest when all hope seems lost. Will you hold fast to the embers, or will you turn away as the storm breaks? The answer waits in the silence, in the shadows, in the place where trust is tested by flame. The hall of Cale Harrow seethed with accusation, the air dense with the reek of betrayal and the iron tang of fear. Seralyne stood at the heart of it all, her hands trembling against the weight of the chains that now bound Kelric. His wrists rubbed raw, the blood seeping through his grim-stained tunic. The torches threw wild shadows across the ancient stones, each flicker illuminating faces twisted by suspicion. Her kin, her would-be betrothed, the vassals sworn to uphold a fragile peace that now threatened to shatter with a single word. Lord Maren's voice rang out, cold and thunderous, denouncing the traitor in their midst, his eyes never leaving Seralyne's pale, defiant face. She did not flinch beneath his gaze. Instead, she felt the ache of every promise she'd ever made, each one unraveling in the hush between the storm's distant peals. She saw the ripple of doubt pass through the assembly, the way old friends glanced aside, unwilling to meet her eyes. In that moment, every kindness she had shown, every secret mercy, was twisted into evidence of her guilt. Yet Kelric stood silent, his dignity unbroken, the fire in his gaze undimmed by pain or humiliation. He did not beg for her to speak. He did not need to. Their truth was a current, running deep and unyielding beneath the surface. It was a story written in the hush of midnight corridors, in the brush of fingers against bruised skin, in the breathless terror of hope. As the court demanded retribution, Seralyne's mind reeled back through the labyrinth of her choices. She saw herself as a child, kneeling at her father's bedside as he pressed a blood-stained hand to her cheek, bidding her swear to keep their house intact, whatever the cost. She remembered the long, lonely years of duty, the vows that weighed heavier than any chain. And then, Kelric, his presence a shard of light in a world grown dark, a reminder that love and loss were always entwined. She did not protest as the guards dragged Kelric forward, nor as Lord Maren pronounced his sentence. The words fell like stones into the silence. At dawn, the traitor would die, and peace, such as it was, would be preserved by sacrifice. Yet the peace they spoke of was a brittle thing, built on secrets and sorrow. Seralyne felt the old rage burn within her, a tempest that threatened to consume all logic, all restraint. The hours until dawn stretched long and empty, filled with the distant thunder of war drums and the ceaseless murmur of rain against the castle walls. Alone in her chamber, Seralyne pressed her forehead to the cold glass, watching the blackness beyond. Her heart twisted with memories, Kelric's laughter in the shadowed crypts, his steady hand guiding her through hidden passageways. The way he had whispered her name, as if it were both prayer and promise. She could not let him die, not for her, not for the sins of their fathers, not for a peace that tasted of ashes. The decision carved itself into her bones with a clarity that eclipsed fear. She donned a cloak, dark as sorrow itself, and moved through the silent halls like a shade, feet barely touching the ancient stones. Each step echoed with the memory of her mother's lullabies, songs of sacrifice and longing, of loves lost to the hunger of war. The dungeons beneath Cael Harrow were colder than she remembered, the air thick with despair, and the ghosts of those who had perished before. Kelric knelt in his cell, head bowed, the torchlight caressing the harsh lines of his face. Without words, she knelt beside him, her hand slipping through the bars to find his. His fingers closed around hers with desperate gratitude, and in that touch was the sum of every vow they had ever broken, every truth they had dared to speak. She told him, voice trembling, that she would not let the dawn claim him. She confessed the price, her own freedom, her birthright, her very name. There was no more room for secrets. She would barter everything, stake her soul upon a single hope that love once kindled could survive even the fire of betrayal. Kelric's eyes shone with unshed tears, the pain of longing and loss pressed into every line of his face. He pressed her hand to his lips, a silent benediction, and the world seemed to still around them, leaving only the beat of their hearts in the dark. She vanished into the night, cloak billowing behind her as she made her way to the Lord's chamber. She found Lord Marin brooding over the maps of war, his face carved by ambition and old wounds. She offered her bargain, her own life for Kelric's, exile for mercy, silence for the preservation of peace. The words tasted of blood and regret. Lord Marin studied her for a long, terrible moment, his anger a living thing. Yet something in her eyes must have reached him. A plea older than war, a hunger for redemption that could not be quenched by vengeance. He agreed, but only if she left Cael Harrow before the first light, her name stricken from every record, her memory erased from the annals of her house. The decision was swift. In the grey hush before dawn, the guards led Kelric from his cell, his hands unbound, but his eyes fixed on Seralyne as if to memorize the curve of her face, the trembling strength in her shoulders. She stood before the gathered court one last time, her head held high, the weight of her choices etched in every line of her bearing. She did not weep when her mother turned her face away, nor when her brother's voice trembled with accusation. She let her gaze linger on Kelric, the man who had become both salvation and undoing. They crossed the threshold of the fortress together, but the world beyond was already drawing them apart. The price of mercy was separation, the cost of love was exile. At the edge of the wild, where the land fell away into mist and bramble, they paused. The wind howled cold and unforgiving, but between them was a warmth that no storm could extinguish. Kelric brushed a strand of hair from Seralyne's brow, his touch reverent, as if to memorize her for all the lifetimes they would spend apart. She pressed a token into his palm, a ring forged from the steel of her father's sword, the last relic of a life she had given up for him. In words barely more than breath, she asked him to remember that trust, once betrayed, could be rebuilt in the ashes, that love, once lost, could still guide them home. He promised, voice rough with unshed tears, that he would carry her memory like a flame through every darkness, that he would search the world for a day when peace did not require such cruel bargains. They parted as the sun breached the horizon, painting the world in gold and sorrow. Seralyne watched Kelric vanish into the wild, her heart breaking and mending with every step he took. Alone now, she turned her face to the dawn, the exile's road stretching before her, uncertain, unkind, but hers to walk. Cael Harrow would remember her as a traitor, her name spoken only in anger or regret, but in the secret places of the world, in the songs of travelers and the whispered prayers of those who dared to hope, her story would live on. In the end, it was not the sword or the seal that defined her, but the courage to choose love over fear, to let the old world burn and trust that something new might rise from the embers. If you have ever wondered whether the heart can survive the fire of betrayal, Look to the horizon at dawn, where a lone figure walks into legend. For even in the ruins of shattered alliances, hope flickers, fragile, defiant, and unyielding as the heart that dared to love in the shadows.